Dit is de eerste introductievideo over CSRD. Veel gehoorde term die voor veel bedrijven relevant is. En we gaan daar in deze korte vergadering, meeting, hoe wil je het noemen, daarover hebben. En daarvoor heb ik 2 experts bij me. De eerste expert die ik bij me heb is Sam. Goedemiddag, Sam. Goedemiddag, Sam. We gaan vanaf nu in het Engels, omdat we ook internationale gasten hebben. Good afternoon, Sam. Can you introduce yourself?
Sure. So I'm Sam Khola, the co-founder of OmniPlanet Solutions. We drive sustainability progress in partnership with businesses across multiple continents. And obviously, with the CSRD, obviously now as a top priority agenda item in Europe, for now, but also we believe throughout this decade.
Yeah, and our second guest is Dan Cooper. Good afternoon, Dan.
Good afternoon. Dan Cooper, partnering with Sam Khola here, based in the United States, focused heavily around our energy and the technical solutions that we can drive to solve energy efficiency and contribute to the CSRD process.
Yeah, and Sam and Dan, CSRD is a big thing, but we noticed that a lot of companies are not really into it at the moment. Can you explain a little bit more about it, Sam? What is CSRD?
Yeah, sure. That's a really good one. I think that's always good to start with that. And basically, so the CSRD really stands for Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. It is it's a new EU directive that will take effect for large unlisted companies first, and that requests them obviously by law to share information on how they monitor a wide range of ESG issues and the impacts of those issues on the planet. The goal of the CSRD, in essence, is to provide mainly transparency, or if you like, better transparency, obviously, because there are businesses that already publish quite a bit about their ESG performance. So basically, having better transparency that will help investors, trade associations, employees, consumers, analysts, and of course other stakeholders as well, to better evaluate the EU companies' sustainability performance, as well as the related business impacts and risks. So it's both ways. That comes back. I'll go into detail of that in some other session, what is called double materiality, but basically it's the risks and opportunities as well. And of course, for those familiar with the predecessor of the CSRD, which was called NFRD, and that stands for because there are a lot of terms, so it's good to explain a little bit what they are. So NFRD stands for Non-Financial Reporting Directive. You will basically need to be aware that the CSRD was introduced as part of the European Commission's Sustainable Finance Package. But with the CSRD, this is being expanded in terms of scope, the sustainability disclosures, and the reporting requirements compared to its predecessor, the NFRD. And of course, last but not least, an important, not really very much talked about, but very important to note that CSRD is therefore, as well, essentially, is a vehicle for achieving the goals of the European Green Deal too, which is a big part of what the European Commission and the European Union is pushing for, climate neutrality by 2050.
Yeah, so it sounds like a lot of companies are impacted on this. Then, did you want to say something?
No, go ahead.
So I'm quite curious, maybe for you then, who's impacted by the CSRD? Can you tell me more about that?
Well, I'm going to flip it back over to Sam, but just to add, as Sam said, there's been a lot of information, and it's very, a little bit confusing as to who is really impacted. So Sam, I believe we have a chart. If you want to kick it over to that chart to try to explain, who's really in it. I think most groups feel, well, this probably doesn't impact me. I think this is more kind of flipped over. It pretty much impacts the large majority of large, small companies across the board, certainly right away in Europe, and also, trickling now into the United States. But we'll have Sam touch a little bit more to try to get a little clarity about who's really impacted. And again, it leans more towards you probably are impacted than not. Go ahead, Sam.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Dan. And I think, what you obviously said absolutely right is that even though you may think you're not impacted, because, and I'll explain that in a minute, there is obviously a phased approach to this that is being set by the European Commission. However, even though you may not be legally required to share your report right now or in the next year or two, you will see that there is an impact on you to provide that data otherwise to your value chain. And we'll come back to that later on. So in a nutshell, the CSRD has really been divided into a few groups who would need to comply to that. First of all, the very first ones that will be impacted are those who already are reporting in the NFRD. And on top of that, and that's, by the way, next year. So the data for this year, 2024, would need to be gathered for reporting on that data in the beginning of 25. So these are everyone who's been under the NFRD compliance, but also companies that meet two of the three criteria, which are you're either 250 employees or above, or you are having a balance sheet of 20 million euros or above, or 40 million euros in turnover or above, which means any of these two, if you meet that as a company, you would be part of that first round as well, which means you would need to basically collect 2024 data, which obviously we're in February now. So you should have already started for January throughout December to be able to report it in basically in 2025. Now, what is very important here, obviously there are a number of other, I know it's not the topic of the day, but it's important to know that there are a number of other regulatory requirements as well that are either already there or coming up. One of them being, and again, that's for the audience to make sure that they are aware, for those who are impacted, have a look at what's going to happen for the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive. That's for basically businesses in a nutshell. There are more details on this, by the way, on the European Commission website. But essentially, companies that have more than 500 employees and 150 million in turnover. And then you have the EU taxonomy, which has already been there for a few years. That's also an important one to look at. And then you have the Sustainability Finance Disclosure Regulation. That is also an important one to look at, because multiple types of businesses will have multiple impact for those as well. But this is not the topic of the day, so we'll leave that for now.
Yeah, I understand. What I hear from you guys then, and Sam, is that it's applicable for a lot of companies in Europe, but there's no focus on it. So people don't do it at the moment. And if I ask for you, Sam, is there a risk if people don't do this?
Well, first of all, so there are a lot of companies. So the NFRD, by the way, had 11,700, I think, that was supposed to be impacted, and they were. With this CSRD, that scope, with the new scope and new scope, obviously, of the types of businesses as well, we are talking about 50,000+ companies that will be impacted with the CSRD. But let's have a look. Actually, we did, I think, a simple slide on that one, right? So there are multiple risks.
Yeah, and maybe you can say something about that. What would be the risk if they don't do this at the moment and they say, like, you know what, I'm not going to do it?
Yeah, I mean, there's two sides. The flashy one here, from a regulatory standpoint, legal standpoint, you see here, France noted, they're going to start treating this the same and holding corporate directors to the reports the same way they do around financials. And, with that comes penalties if you don't comply. So I think you'll start to see that. France was a leader there. I'm sure over time you'll see some of that baked into legislation in the United States. But also importantly, these companies, all usually rely on each other in the supply chain. So even from a business value perspective, you're going to be producing something and you're going to be handing it upstream to someone, and those companies are going to look for this information, and you're going to need to really be part of the supply chain. You're going to need to have this to comply with business. So yeah, these regulation pieces will come. That's good. That just shows the emphasis. But more importantly, I feel businesses will see this as a risk to their financial and their long-term planning if they're not part of the program, as they, might lose out on supplier opportunities.
Yeah, so it's not only the larger companies that Sam mentioned in the beginning, but also the complete supplier chain who needs to participate in this process.
Correct.
Yeah.
And I heard you saying it started in January this year. What would be basically, when I hear you talking, I would say that the most companies are already late if you haven't started yet. Is there anything like what you can tell about the timeline?
Yeah, so let me take that. I think, the timeline is obviously starting already. So 2024 data is going to be needed for reporting by these businesses in 25. So what is very important here to note, though, is, and actually we put that in red, just for the audience to really understand that while if we take the SME community, obviously that will be in a later group for reporting, let's not forget a lot of big businesses have the SMEs and other smaller businesses as part of their value chain. And as the value chain is part of your reporting for the data, they will depend on you as a small or medium enterprise to deliver that data to them so that they can comply with the regulation. So I think this is something not really well emphasized, I believe, for, whatever I look at, actually, it's very important for those small, medium enterprises as well as the rest of the value chain, even though you may need to comply with that regulation in 2-3 years from your own reports perspective. Let's not forget, your customers and your partners will need to have data if they need to actually provide their report next year, early next year. You would need to provide data to them too. So there is a very important note here to make sure that those partners and those small, medium enterprises and other businesses are aware of that fact as well. So not just looking at the dates, which is, I think, quite clear on the European Commission website.
I think just to add too, Sam, I mean, some of the reports, you start reporting on in 2025, but if some of this information you're not collecting today, you wouldn't really be able to report on it. So it's key that you know what you're going to need to be reporting on, and identifying that you at least are currently tracking and keeping that as part of your own day-to-day business routine today.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that's, to be honest, where I think we're looking at some extremely important aspects of this exercise. This is, there's a lot of data that we are talking about here. I mean, the ESRS has 12 big chunks of data types that you would need to report on. So if you really want to do CSRD properly, you should have, by the way, already started last year, although you need to collect the data for 2024 for companies who report next year. However, you need to identify all of that. There is a process around that. So, within the OmniPlanet solution, when we support businesses, we've divided that into 6-7 very specific steps. And what it does is that it helps you to, first of all, to make sure you generate your double materiality. And double materiality, in a very simple and in a nutshell, is you need to identify your stakeholders and talk to those stakeholders to see what are those material topics to your business, and look at risks and opportunities based on that. And that's a hard requirement, by the way, within the CSRD. And then we do a gap analysis. The gap analysis really helps you to see, what do I have already and what is it that I need to complement that data with. And then we look at data and IT systems. That's an important part as well, because we're talking about such a vast amount of types of data and metrics. I mean, it's 1,144 different metrics that are as part of the ESRS today. And that may expand in the future, obviously, with sector-specific data as well. So having data and IT system is important too. By the way, that's not enough, though, because you need to still have a governance and proper controls in place. We also help businesses to make sure that they identify the right external assurance readiness partners. That, by the way, is a hard requirement as well. That needs to be there for the CSRD. And of course, last but not least, is how you generate the final annual report. That's an important one. Yeah. So for each of these steps, obviously there are some very important guidelines that have to be followed. As I mentioned, the double materiality is a key one. Governance and control, external assurance, the annual report. all of those are specifics. They really need to kind of be sorted out as part of your strategy quite some time in advance. Yeah? And that is where I think the key importance here comes in, is if you do not have the resource in home, you need to start to getting that in place already to be able to really properly manage that. Otherwise, you obviously have the risks we spoke about already. You would be penalized legally, but of course, as Dan said earlier, it's not only the legal implications, of course. Yeah, you have reputational issues that you need to deal with. You have issues with getting, right talent into your business quite often, because businesses do see that as being, an important piece. Also, because they want to get new, fresh talent, and when you are not really even able to comply with the regulation, then reputational damage is quite big. And not to mention, of course, businesses that may not want to partner with you. That's another direct financial impact, because there are many more of those types of strategic thinking to have when you're talking about the CSRD. Yeah? And I think we do. I think we did have a slide on the final slide, probably on that one, where we have if you do not know that how to basically go about, make sure you got the right resources in place. There are other resources, of course. I think that was one thing that you wanted to ask, I think, Richard. What are resources that you can get? And
I think that it's important for companies, the suppliers who just noticed, like, oh, I really need to get started with CSRD, and you already explained it, Sam, but what are the next steps? What do I have to do? Where do I have to start? How do I get this data? And who has to do this, etc.? What resources can you use to get this data and to get your people skilled? And I think it all says it in this slide, but Sam and Dan, go ahead, tell more about it. Well, how can we help these companies?
Yeah, so I
just have one piece, Sam. I think it's important too. You help the companies. You see this as, hey, this is an extra potential burden that's being put on my company, and it's why. But hopefully you can look at it as there is good information in here to help you better manage your company going forward. So it's not just a side shoot that I have to do this as part of reporting. It's hopefully you'll see that the information you start to review and do some analysis on as part of this becomes improvement to day-to-day operations of your organization. So I think that's also the help. Don't look at it as just how do I check the boxes to get this done. Look at this as an opportunity to improve some of your business processes by bringing forward some potentially new information that you haven't always looked at. But I think you will see benefit to just a good running of the business. And oh, by the way, yes, that new data needs to be part of the reporting and not just a burden of a box that you have to check.
No, because you will fall behind if you don't do it as well. Yep. Any extra recommendations, Sam?
No, I think basically what you guys already said. What would be really important, I think, for businesses to really consider here is it's starting to move. If you haven't moved, you really get to start. And if you have started already, but you don't know how to basically, improve or take the next step, get external support. I think that's very important. And external support could be anything. Go on there's a lot of updates obviously coming in that space. So go on to the European Commission website. They, do updates pretty regularly. The big agencies certainly do that as well. Smaller support agencies do that as well. And there's a lot of material online. There's a lot on YouTube. If you really just want to, if you can't afford it to hire someone in, make sure that you read yourself into what is actually already out there. It's for free. Otherwise, get partners that can help you. You don't have to necessarily get support for a full bunch of what you want to do. Maybe you want to get an agency that helps you to train a certain team in your team, and they can do the job. We, for example, do that as well. And there are, I'm sure, many other partners who obviously do that as well. And that helps you to just get started. Yeah. So I would say don't wait, but make sure you start so you've identified the gaps and you adhere to the timelines that we showed earlier.
Agreed. I think we should wrap it up here. Thank you very much, Dan and Sam, for all your information. For everyone watching this and thinking this is really interesting for us, or this is about me, please come in contact with Sam, Dan, or with me, and we can help you further. We will come back with more videos about this topic and with training for your colleagues, etc., to help you getting started with CSRD. So leave a comment behind or send us a direct message or an email so we can help you further. Thank you very much, guys, for this conversation.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Richard.
Bye-bye.